Design Notes is a show about creative work and what it teaches us. I'm your host, Liam Spradlin. Each episode, I talk with people from unique creative fields to discover what inspires and unites us in our practice. This time, I'm welcoming Rob Giampietro back to the show to talk about how to ship ambitious design projects, the role of self-expression in UX, and the irreplaceable meaning that we can derive from art that's made by human hands. Rob is the head of creative at Notion, and in our episode, we get into all these topics and more by exploring a project called Notion Faces. It's a tool that grew from an internal company tradition into an external way for every user to bring their own confetti to the software. The project is a great case study for some of the logistical, organizational, and creative pressures that I think face our work in UX every day, and it's a story I'm glad to have Rob here to share with you. Let's get started. Okay. Rob, welcome back to Design Notes.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me back. It's such a treat to be a returning guest.
Listeners who have been listening for a while, since I think our 25th episode or so, will recognize you. Much of our audience might recognize you anyways, but for those who are just tuning in, tell me a little bit about kind of who you are, what you're working on, and how you got there.
Yeah, I am Rob Giampietro. I live in New York City. I'm a designer. I write about design. I teach design. I've been doing it for over 20 years now. I've had my own practice, projects. I've been director of design at MoMA. At Google, Liam, you and I worked together, which was really fun. And then I'm currently at Notion, and I'm the head of creative there.
We actually started planning this episode a few months ago after we had a chance to catch up in New York. And at the time that we met up, Notion had just launched this project, Notion Faces. And we had a really cool conversation about that. So I wanted to talk about it on the show because I think there's a lot that will be relevant to our audiences. But first, what is the Notion Faces project?
Notion Faces is really simply just a way for you to make faces in our Notion illustration style. And it's a tool, faces.notion.com, that anyone can go to and use for free. And they can make a face that resembles themselves, like a portrait, or they can make a funny face that is just a cool piece of art or something that helps them with a project. It sort of arose from internal traditions at Notion. So when Ivan and Simon were doing their original kind of pitch, they didn't want to have kind of traditional like photo portraits of themselves. So they hired a New Yorker illustrator, Roman Muradov, who now is our in-house illustrator at Notion, to do their portraits kind of in like a brush and ink style, like very similar to what you'd see in the New Yorker. And those portraits also kind of ended up on the first about page on Notion's website. And then I think as more, as Roman started working more closely on other illustrations for Notion and people started getting hired at the company, it became kind of a tradition to get your portrait illustrated when you arrived. And then people started using those on platforms like LinkedIn or in like help center situations to kind of identify themselves as what we call Notinos or Notion employees. So that was sort of like the germ of it. But it was interesting because it was sort of a two-sided problem. Like as soon as we started putting out these illustrated faces, our community wanted them too. And then also, as Notion has grown so dramatically in the last few years, we, the creative team, were getting kind of more and more and more backlogged. We had a few kind of illustrators who had learned the style. Iris Chang is one of our wonderful other in-house illustrators. She was a student of Ramon's. And then we had a few freelancer illustrators as well. But even then, we couldn't keep up with demand. So it was almost like it went from like get it when you join to like get it on your first year anniversary kind of thing. And then I think we also had this situation where we knew we wanted to do something that everyone in the community could use, but how to scale it and how to do it in a way that that was the question, like the right way to do it at scale. But every like agency we would ever work with or even get a pitch from would pitch us this idea of like, what if you had a portrait thing that like people could use? And I think the other thing that happened was sort of, over my time at Notion, we've launched a bunch of like adjacent products. So we've launched Notion Calendar and Notion Mail and Notion Marketplace last year at Make with Notion, which was our first, user conference. And so as a user, your Notion identity now needs to be more portable across these different surfaces. Like when you send an email or when you do his calendar scheduling or when you publish a Notion template, it's actually really useful to have an identity that's portable across all those surfaces. And then, we happen to have a brand that people really love and feel connected to and love to share their love with others about. And so, it's awesome when people want to be your hype person and honestly change like one of the most personal parts of themselves, like their face, to be kind of within a style that like even making your Apple emoji is like a very kind of like amazing thing that you like want to turn yourself into a cartoon, So
Yeah.
so we just thought, oh, this is a great way for people that love Notion to sort of also share that love and activate maybe new users or make people more aware of the product.
Yeah, I want to dig into that a bit. It's really fascinating that this started out as something internal, like these portraits started out for people who work at Notion, and then obviously within the Notion community, that would be, a clear identifier and maybe even like prestigious to have such an avatar. But I also think like a lot of companies would probably see externalizing something like that as a kind of risk, that it would be so closely tied to what had been established as a brand asset. How did you all think about that?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that happened was because there was such a desire from our community and such a passion, that people had started making third-party versions of
Mm.
Notion portraits. And so like, people are so passionate that they will find a way to get, to make what they need if they don't have it or if we haven't made it yet. But when you have a group of users online and you see the variation of all of that, it doesn't really feel like a coherent
Mm.
community as much when
Mhm.
there's so much variegation in the style. And then I think illustration is just such an important part of our brand. We were really curious, like, how could we do this? Like, how could we give people a tool that, you know, maybe was a better quality tool than some of the third party tools, and that made them feel more connected to each other and to Notion. And when I first joined, I had seen there was like a kind of a set of Photoshop filters that Ramon had made where you could turn on and off different layers in Photoshop and, kind of Mr. Potato Head together. Sort of, it was a proof of concept, really, like a sketch. And then one of our other designers, Sam Baldwin, had taken that and moved it into Figma, so it's a little easier to use. And sometimes we would use those for like user sketches, like in like UX sketches for marketing materials, or even like back to school sometimes. But like they had a very lightweight footprint in our marketing materials. So Alex Howe, who was our lead social at the time, and David Tibbetts, who's like a really early Notion employee, kind of teamed up and pitched taking this Figma kind of thing and turning it into something that we could externalize. And they just thought it would show a lot of love for the community and create a lot of buzz and enthusiasms on social. And so because illustration and art direction was my department, it sort of the baton was handed to me to say, okay, Rob, like figure out how this can happen. And it was I was like, thank you so much, this is a wonderful challenge. But also, like, the more I dug into it, the more complicated I realized it was. Now I love like a challenge, and I love kind of learning about a problem in that way, especially when it's pretty ambiguous. At first, we spent a little while, like the first few months, thinking that the building of the tool was going to be the problem. Like, who could build this? Could our web team build it? There was kind of an internal web sort of on a weekend. One of the web engineers had taken the Figma and sort of tried to webify it, but it wasn't quite working the way we wanted it to yet. And then we were also wondering, should we try to get it on an engineering roadmap? Like, was that the right way? But I think very quickly we started to realize that the problem wasn't really engineering. It was a pretty straightforward tool that we wanted to make. The problem was actually like all of the illustrations that we needed, because Ramon had actually spent about 6 months in building that kind of set of Photoshop layers. And in that 6 month time, he'd done, I think, 170 or so pieces. So the kind of the proof of it was there, but it had just been exhausting for him to just be sitting and illustrating these
Yeah.
things. And he's also like doing campaigns and all kinds of other things. And we realized that like to get enough to actually represent like a global user base, the proof of concept was really like it looked like 8 college students in different but to get something that actually looks like the Notion community around the world, like we only wanted to launch something that on day one would feel inclusive and like where
Yeah.
people would actually want to represent themselves. So the problem quickly shifted from being like one that we thought was technical to being one that was actually about scaling illustration bandwidth, and like how to do that. And I think from there we went onto another interesting journey because obviously we're in the world of like generative AI right now. I think we actually worked with a company to train a model to sort of see how we could potentially take a picture that someone would upload and like turn it into a Notion face that sort of had the controls of some of the templated modular stuff that we were working with. But we quickly noticed that it was very like low quality. Also, like sometimes some of the dot screens and color kind of tints and tones that we use to represent skin color and hair color in the product were like getting kind of really like zeroed out and made white. And so, you could upload a picture of yourself and it was really looking just for the edges or the contours of your face rather than like all of the information about your face.
Right.
And so even for the initial presentation of like, here's what we got out of the model, we were doing some like finessing and adjusting. And we realized that like, while it might help us with our internal employee problem, because we could do a little bit of fixing, it wouldn't scale to like a self-serve product for everyone.
I want to talk about that because I think like this project is actually a great surface to explore like so many things. First of all, that you first went down the route of trying to prioritize it as an Eng feature and then ended up in like what I would consider from my viewpoint a very fortunate position of like it's not actually an Eng problem. The problem is somewhere else that is
Yeah.
maybe even, I don't know, more fun to address. But also that this is something where the scale was the thing, like scaling this art approach. And I think especially right now, when people run into scale problems, they want to smash the big red AI button. but you all like very deliberately went in the hand-drawn direction, even knowing how much work it was. And not just because the AI like wasn't cutting it, but because there was really something there subjectively in this like, in the pursuit of representing humans, like you needed to bring humans
Yes.
into the
Yes.
process.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that was it. You're saying it better than I did. It's like we weren't getting the same kind of joy and feeling from the AI generated faces as we were from the ones that were made of Roman's hand drawn
Mhm.
components. Um, and then I think also like while we were doing all that work, we also launched Notion AI, which is a very simplified cartoon face without a mouth, actually, because it speaks through text. It doesn't use its mouth. We call it Nosy internally. And it's sort of like inspired by variously like the Mac Finder, Tintin, Picasso, like Disney
Mhm.
characters. Like it has a lot of inputs, but some Bruno Minari masks and things, some Japanese no masks and things. But like it's the most simplified form of human face. Like, if you look at like Scott McCloud's diagram from Understanding Comics, and there's like the smiley face, and then there's like the hyper realistic portrait. We actually wanted to be able to introduce faces that are not only as, felt as nice as our hand drawn portraits, but also could differentiate themselves from AI agents that might be working in your workspace alongside you. And so there was a very intentional feeling that like, it needed to be a few ticks above kind of basic, It needed to be high quality, something that someone would want to opt into. But what's the other thing that's interesting is that we realized that like when you make a cartoon of someone, you're simplifying them, and when you have an illustrator like doing like a caricature at a county fair or something like that, like they notice a lot of things that like kind of make you and can like heighten those things in the cartoon. And so it's possible to use likeness in cartooning, even though there's a degree of simplification and abstraction that comes with cartooning. But the other problem we had was at scale, we don't have that sort of human intelligence working on, whether we did it through AI or whether we did it through hand-drawn components, it was still modular, right? So we needed to move away from likeness as our kind of metric of like, is this good? And instead we needed to give people expression. And even within Notion, like the hand-drawn portraits were starting to get hard on Slack of like, which brown-haired colleague of mine is this, but with expression it's like, oh, like Sarah always wears a party hat, because that's her silly avatar. And so like you expression helps you supersede the problems of abstraction and modularity in like the illustrated portrait structure, and also brings emotion and a sense of authorship to that you
Right.
as the user, instead of the cartoon artist heightening those things, like you as the user are bringing confetti because that's how you feel and that's what you want to project at work.
Yeah.
So I think that was another big unlock for us, and that was actually kind of why we decided to call it Notion Faces instead of Notion Portraits. Like, is that we realized that like we wanted to make it possible for people to, sure, they could create their portrait, but they could also create like any face they wanted for any reason. And
Yeah.
like if they wanted to use it as a toy and just make silly faces and send them back and forth to their friends, like we wanted to make that okay.
Yeah. I
So
think I wanna like pause there for a second, especially the concept of like the user brings their own confetti. I think in like in interface broadly right now, we're seeing a move towards like things that are trying to, I mean, we've been moving towards more nuanced adaptation to the user and their context for the past, I don't know, 60 years or something, maybe longer. But we're really seeing a concerted effort now, especially with new technical capabilities, to like add that level of expression to the entire interface. But I also want to say, like, it's those elements both in the Faces project, but as I said, this is part of what makes this project so interesting to talk about in an interface frame. In the interface broadly, like, it can be those things that are not strictly necessary or that aren't like directly serving a productive goal that end up making it a good experience.
yeah, completely. I mean, I think that was a huge impetus behind the creation of Nosy, for example. The Notion AI, our Notion AI character is like, it didn't need to be a cute face with like Rive game engine animation powering it, with like, interpreting AI states through its facial expressions and all of that. Like it didn't need to do, that was not a piece that we needed to do to launch the product, but it created a really ownable and branded touch point that helps people remember that they had AI in their workspace.
Mhm.
A lot of times when you're trying to like make a database and write a bunch of stuff, and you forget that AI is there to actually be able to help you do that. And so the delight and the kind of extraness of it is like really, hopefully not in any way distracting, but a really nice invitation to sort of just like remind you or jog your memory that like there's an agent there that can help you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're right. It's like sometimes it's there to just kind of keep something top of mind. Sometimes it's there because we believe deeply, like on every level of our company, that like people should be able to have fun at work. Like we have this kind of diagram that Ramon made of like work and play and the kind of like as a loop. And I think the whole idea of just like almost turning yourself into your like fun work self is like a very notiony idea. It just makes collaboration like a little more lighthearted and playful. We just launched this kind of landing page where we supported the Severance podcast, and it's kind of, we're doing a bunch of like Notion and Severance crossover things, but we made like Notion faces for the Severance cast. It's just like you find once you have it, you find all of these other ways to sort of make things fun and make things branded that you didn't think of before. Like it's actually found a million uses that we didn't realize we needed it for once we had it. So
I think bringing up like this Nosy, like the AI kind of agent of Notion, keeps coming up, and I think it's really interesting to think about. Like, you said, of course it refers to like all of these abstractions of faces, but on almost like a poetic level, I think it's interesting that it approaches the smiley face. It approaches the, like, you can have two dots in a line in any orientation and recognize that it's a face, in contrast to these portraits that are like much more nuanced and much more human feeling. It's almost like acknowledging that the place we're at right now with LLMs is like they are made to approach you in a way that a human does, and yet you recognize like there are still clear signals that this is not a subject that you're dealing with.
Yeah, totally. But this is a bot and not a person, and like we celebrate both. That like that simplified agent can be joyfully simple, and that the like human can be more richly joyful and complex. And yeah, I think that's where like going above and beyond to celebrate the human like users of our product was like precisely the message we wanted to send. Like we didn't want to do something that was just like, okay, cool, you can use our like kind of hacky internal tool. Like we really wanted to like almost just anticipate, as and we can continue to actually like add parts to it as we get requests, or like people there's a feedback thing in the tool that people use all the time to say like, I wish there was an X or a Y. Or we take it really seriously, and we try to like create a full range of experiences in what using that part of our product means.
Yeah, let's talk about that. I want to get more specific about how you developed all of the pieces, because I think I remember from our conversation before that it was quite an involved process that also involved like many people and practitioners along the way.
Yes, it did. So let me go back to like sort of where we were in our story, which is when we realized that like we had this problem of scaling illustration instead of scaling engineering, and that AI wasn't going to cut it. So then we needed to say, okay, how can we tackle this problem with human illustrators? And Rahman, I think, started to realize and be supportive of the idea that if it's hard sometimes if someone's doing the whole drawing to make it look like his work, or even for him to want someone to emulate his work in that way. But for like when you mix pieces and they're on a grid and they're kind of it's the style of them and the brushes and things are very dictated, you can actually have a few different illustrators and it doesn't like look bad. If anything, it's like they're creating these like potential ingredients and the user is completing it. So as we did some tests, and we had been working with Buck, and so they were a natural collaborator to reach out to and say, they have many illustrators working for them, but we also wanted to have some sort of selection to build a team that Rahman felt really good about and felt could kind of like work closely with him. And so we reached out to them and we said, here's our idea. We were like, cool, let's do this. Let's try to scale the illustration through multiple people rather than through AI. But then the first question was like, well, how many parts do you think you're going to need? Like, what's the scope of this project, And we didn't actually know the answer to that question. And so that thus began the next chapter of like, what is the MVP of Notion Faces, of what it like, we want to be globally representative of all users, but how much is enough to kind of get us started? And to do that, we actually we worked with Buck's strategy group to evaluate 11 different emoji systems that we identified with them, and like look at kind of their range of coverage from kind of Memoji to Bitmoji to, I'm trying to remember all the Lego yourself, like different things. There were a lot. And the interesting thing, so we learned a lot and we kind of got a sense of like okay, we're going to need a lot of hair. Like that was, I think, the first big insight. And then also just like accessibility was really important to us. Like, we wanted to be able to represent things like hearing aids. We wanted to be able to represent different types of dress that people have around the world and things like that. So I think we have like roughly, I think we really tried, like, in terms of inclusion, we tried for roughly the coverage of Memoji, but without kind of the animated pieces and like all of the different color variations. But they have like some expressive pieces, and we really did want to include like 15 or so % of the new parts to be just pure joy or pure fun, like sipping a mochi bubble tea or whatever. That's important too, and like that was sort of part of our brief, was like not just representation but expression too.
How did you test this? Like once you have like X times X times X number of pieces, how do you test them for like coherence, or are there like certain characters that you always test, or how do you go about like kind of proofing that the whole system fits together?
So a couple different things. Yeah. So we basically, we got this list of like, okay, we're going to need all these different kind of hairstyles. We're going to need all these different kind of accessories and nose and eye styles and different things. So we made that list. We actually, then brought it into Notion. We started prioritizing it. We started, putting sprints together with the illustrators. So like, week 1 delivery was going to be this set of things. We then used the internal kind of web tool that we had built, which was still a little bit rough and ready, but we would port some of the illustrated components into that. And then we would often test the quality of it with people that were internal users of Notion. And I think this is where maybe I should say 2 things, which is, number one, another interesting aspect of this project was like, who should pay for it? Because it wasn't necessarily clear, like it wasn't a marketing initiative alone. It wasn't it wound up being our wonderful ex-chief people officer, Marianne Brown, who said, I want, new Notinos to have their portrait on day 1.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can write a check once and make that happen, that's a great check for me to write, And so she partnered, I pitched her on it, but she partnered with me to essentially help us bring Buck on to do the scaling of that work. So it's another one of those things of like, when you're trying to do something that kind of works at the margins of everyone's areas of ownership, you have to kind of find the right partner who's just like excited and realizes that like they can make this possible, like they can be the one. So yeah, she was like actually like the executive sponsor of Faces, even though we then kind of did a whole huge marketing campaign around it for New Year's. But before that, because of her sponsorship and because of the importance of us to sort of make sure we got this right, we would go to the different ERGs, like our Black Thought ERG, or Women at Notion ERG, and we would allow them to use these kinds of early components that we were making and test and give us feedback on, how were they feeling, what were they missing, what did they not like about it, and we got a lot of notes, a lot of feedback on, especially hair was really like the thing I remember the most.
Mm-hmm.
There was just so much feedback on hair. I still don't know if we totally have like all the hairstyles that people really want, but the eyes and mouths and things are very simple. So hair is a really important part of like how you express yourself in the tool. But we worked with our own ERGs to sort of validate that. And then once we had, it was sort of like a rolling, like a fish food, dog food, like it was kind of a rolling set of tests. Mm-hmm. So once we finished the sprint with Buck, then we brought it to our localization team, and they started sort of looking for like, okay, what will we need in these different regions that we support, and where are some questions we have about that. And then after that, before we launched it in New Year's to the world, we also offered it to like our internal community, kind of like trusted tester group. And so we figured, like, as we kind of staged it in these different phases, we would just get more and more and more feedback of what we needed to make it better. But the good news is that we did add a couple components, we did adjust some components, but like for the most part, we were realizing like kind of our intent to be comprehensive was like landing pretty well with everybody. So yeah, we were on track for our New Year's launch, which was cool.
Yeah, I want to talk about that, but I also want to get into like two more things that came up for me while you were telling that story that are like that map so perfectly onto like the experiences of I think every practicing designer right now, which are like, one, getting executive support for your project is huge. I want to know about that. And two, like essentially research, especially in cases where you might not have like a dedicated team for it. You were able to go to your coworkers basically and ask them some questions. But yeah, it sounds like your executive support was like pretty enthusiastic and might have come naturally. But were there any more steps to that process, or like how you would advise practicing designers to like find that person who kind of gets it?
I think there were folks at Notion that were excited about, you know, helping fund it if it was AI driven, because it was really going to be like showing that we can use AI with illustration in this interesting way. And I think we will find a way to tell that part of our story too. But I think for this, we just weren't, maybe it was tech readiness or maybe it was our approach, but we just really felt like we needed the hand-drawn illustrations to get the message we wanted. And so then once we had that, I think I was just sort of like, okay, this isn't like a marketing campaign expense. This isn't like an engineering problem. It's almost like infrastructure. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like, it's the person feeling the pain the most right now is probably Marianne, who's our head of people ops, who's really just like not getting these portraits fast enough and is always having to apologize and tell people that like, you know, the creative team works really hard and they're going to get it done as fast as they can for you. And we just changed the policy and now it's 1 year instead of, you know, day of. Or, like, I think it wasn't a massive check to write. Like, I really felt like, you know, what we spend on sort of like offsites or other ways to make our employees feel good, you know, this, in the scheme of that, this isn't so dramatic. And so I approached one of her deputies and I just said, like, I'm working on this cookie project and I'm thinking about talking to Marianne about it. Like, what do you think she would think? And she was very approachable and we had a good relationship too. But like, I just kind of wanted to get like a pre-flight. And she was like, oh my God, do you want me to talk to her about it? Like, I think it's so cool. Like, because I think those teams like are so often sort of working in their lane that they don't always get to do creative projects in the same way that we do. Like, they're very creative people, but I think one of the fun things about being a creative is like, you know, giving other people permission to be creative with you and like bringing them along on that journey. And so I think they were just so proud to be sponsoring it. And then I think we like started to look at like, well, what are the ways that they enable inclusion throughout Notion, and how can we use those pathways to make sure that our product's inclusive? So I was really happy, you know, to like, when she was comfortable with us working with the ERGs and we worked with her chief of staff to like kind of make space for that at some of the meetings that they had and everything. And it's just a really powerful kind of, it brought a lot of Notinos together because ultimately this is a system that was designed to represent them. So it was really cool.
I do also want to get just briefly into the aspect of time, because I think like, if we think about this as a user experience, I think the time that it launched, which as you said was like coinciding with New Year, is like pretty significant in terms of how people experience this, and also like what people's first experience with Notion might be because of this.
Yeah, so once we had basically like the tool and the like pieces all made and it was working really well, that was sort of, we did that over the summer and into the fall. And then we had this, you know, initiative to sort of do some top of funnel growth for Notion. And New Year's is always a time where people are signing up for Notion. You know, they have projects they want to do. They want to change the tools they're using and use better tools. They, you know, and so we just realized like, it's always been a quarter for us that's been very important. And it's a great time to bring on new users who are trying to do something that their other tools maybe aren't allowing them to do. And so we kind of had this very simple idea of like new year, new you, and we realized that this is sort of the new you could be Notion faces. And then it became really interesting because suddenly like top of funnel growth dollars and things started moving in the direction of launching Notion faces. So it was sort of like a product launch or a feature
Mhm.
launch, but like that happened to be a growth campaign also. And like so we I think people just were inspired by like the quality and the vision of the product, and they started kind of, this is also very true at Google. Like when I was working on Google Material, it's like sort of like how a bill becomes a law and you get
Mhm.
people to start co-signing and sponsoring and bringing it forward up the different levels.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's like creating that sense of partnership. So Andrew Szilard, who's our head of growth marketing, like, you know, really helped move a lot of dollars in the direction of the campaign so that we could hit that New Year's moment, which happened to be kind of in our Q4. So it was also like great because we were just like, you know what, let's just like make this big and like let's really celebrate like finally giving the community this thing that they really want.
Yeah.
But we also kind of tried to do it in a smart way. So we targeted like LinkedIn as our primary surface, because we want Notion to be something that people use at work, and we thought that platform, like, it has a very like normal vibe, and we just thought this would like cut through and be something that really would catch people's attention
Mhm.
and that they could participate in. They could change their LinkedIn profile and like give, even if they weren't Notion users, they could just like enjoy the tool to sort of like have fun that week on LinkedIn, or like just bring a little bit of like pizzazz to their profile. So we work with Corporate Natalie a little bit, who's like an influencer, and we also for this campaign partnered with Snoop Dogg, who is obviously an icon and an incredible musician, but also like someone who does a lot of work with small businesses and is an incredible influencer on LinkedIn himself. And we really felt like all the work we had done to kind of like create this much broader set of components, like, is really like, it makes people like Snoop Dogg like be able to make their avatar be really what it looks like Snoop Dogg. You know what I mean? Like, it really looks like him. Really looks like Adam Scott from Severance. Like, and so I think that was also like a really fun thing to kind of partner with him and his team to like be like, here you go, like this is the thing we made for Snoop, and like, does he like it and does he want to talk about it? And that just like kind of really, it was like sort of everybody's like a little sleepy from the holidays and coming back and like checking in at work, and then suddenly Snoop's like, look at this cool thing I made, and everybody's like, I want to make that too.
Yeah.
And it became this sort of like amazing viral LinkedIn hit. And it just, I don't know if it surprised us because we definitely were like hoping that would happen, but it definitely, like, we were so excited and inspired by what everybody did with it and how they embraced it. And it was like over 90% positive sentiment. I mean, we really heard very little kind of concern. It was more just like more, more, more. So that's why we did this like fast follow
Mhm.
Valentine's Day campaign with some like hearts and other things, red components and things like that.
Nice. Rob, I want to wrap up our conversation by asking, I've been asking people lately, I've stopped asking about the future for now. There's kind of enough future happening at the moment. I want to know what you think is kind of the most urgent thing for designers to focus on in their practice right now.
Really good question. It's cliche, but I think we're all adapting to AI and we're all trying to figure out how to embrace that and use it in the best possible ways. And I've always been of the mind that like, it's once it becomes a feature with a name, it stops being AI and it just becomes a normal
Yeah.
feature. So like, autocorrect at Google is a great example of like, it's pattern recognition and it's pattern completion and it's AI. We don't call it AI, we call it autocorrect or autocomplete. And I think there's so many AI tools that are kind of gonna, within creative work especially, I think that are gonna like go on that same arc.
Yeah.
And I think it's about, as a designer, like learning those new tools, staying fresh in your discipline, and all of that. But I also think maybe the other piece that goes with that that's interesting to think about is And I think materials always doing a great job thinking about this is around expression. And like those tools allow you to create things that are so different from things that you maybe would have made yourself. And where does that kind of expressive capacity go? Like, does it benefit the user, or do we stay within like really rigid and like highly like defined systems? People want expression. Like they want interfaces that aren't boring. They look at this all day long. We always talk about having the product feel like water and like feel like it's a neutral surface that you can bring the components and pieces and put them together in the way that you want. And I think that winds up making it very expressive, even though it's very neutral. But I think also when you're doing that kind of like deep analytical work in your brain, having less complexity it's helpful. When you're like hailing a cab or buying food to bring to your house, like a little bit of joy and celebration and expression probably makes that moment like a lot more fun.
Sure. So. Yeah, and bringing it back, it's those like bits, those aesthetic pieces that feel unnecessary. You know, I think part of what we're responding to in design is like the over optimization of the interface. Like there were articles 5 years ago about how everything is a white rectangle with black sans serif text now. And we're like looking for those pieces that like aren't strictly necessary, but like add some feeling, some sensory experience to the whole thing.
Yeah. And I think that the companies and apps and brands that embrace that are gonna be brands that users pay attention to and remember. And I think there's a sobriety to the previous era of design that was very cautious. I mean, it was very tasteful, but it was very cautious. And I think now we're trying to kind of have more fun and maybe take more risks and let users decide a little bit when it doesn't feel like the right risk or going too far. But you need a lot of belief, like from a leadership level, in design and in the power of design to be transformative and iconic in order to ship those types of interfaces. And I think it's cool to see that that's starting to happen, and that like, like there's just some great, like, it's pink. Oh my God. Like, like there's just like stuff where you're like, that's risky, or that would have been risky at a certain point in our design culture, and it's not anymore. And I love that we've made space for that. So
absolutely. Rob, thank you so much for joining me again on Design Notes. This was great.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me back. I hope I can be like a 5-timer or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So fun, I'll have to keep making cool projects, so I'll try to keep it up.
All right.
Thank you, Liam.
You can subscribe to Design Notes on YouTube Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now. If you liked the episode, pass it on to a friend and leave us a rating. Stay tuned for more conversations with creative practitioners across disciplines that will help us learn, piece by piece, what inspires and unites us in our work. And as always, thank you so much for listening.